Hey there, this is Alexis Knight, your no-nonsense guide through the chaotic world of real-life crime. This episode here is a part of the series we are doing, Under the Influence. Now, under the influence in this podcast is being under the influence of another person. So another person has influenced you so much that you are now doing things completely out of character. Joining a cult is one of the more obvious ones, but we also have crimes that are committed by people that otherwise would never do such a thing if they didn't have a certain person influencing their behavior and changing how they think, because this actually happens. Now, here in this episode, I'm going to use an example of someone who becomes under the influence of their own success. We do accept that money and power and fame can change a person. But somehow it's hard for us to accept when one person's behavior changes because of another. So let's look at this example here of Joe Nacchio and how he became completely under the influence of his own success. And then when we're done, I want you to take a minute and realize how you were completely able to accept that this happened. But when it's person to person, we have a challenge here that we're trying to get past. So let's get into this episode here and talk about Joe Nacchio. This guy did a lot of stuff. The making of a mogul. This is part one of Under the Influence, Joe Nacchio. All right, so this is a different kind of influence that I've been talking about. This is the kind that comes with power and money and an insatiable drive for success. So picture this, Joe Nacchio, once a shining star in the world of telecommunications when that was all rising. He was climbing to the top of Qwest Communications, a man who seemed to have it all, fame and wealth, and the kind of influence that could make or break fortunes. But behind the scenes, that success came with a dark side. So today we ask the question, if it is so easy to believe that a man like Joe Nacchio could be influenced by money and power, why is it exactly that it is just so hard, so difficult for us as humans to believe that someone could be under the influence of another person? And I mean in a way that we accept when we are watching trials that have to do with crimes and other things that people are doing, like joining cults, when we believe, hey, I would never do that. I'm not that vulnerable. It's hard for us to believe that anyone can be that vulnerable and that then their actions may or may not be their responsibility. That's where things get tough for us to swallow, right? We don't really want to believe that if someone murdered someone, well, they're not really scary. They just did it because of someone else. And that's where that line gets very, very blurred. So let's take a look at this, though, so that we can understand influence in general and how this can happen. And in this situation, we accept it. All right? Now, Joe Nacchio was a great example of a rise to power. This guy was not your average businessman. He grew up in a working-class family in New York City where he learned the value of hard work and ambition. And this all happened early on in his life. His rise began when he joined AT&T, and this happened in the late 60s. Then he moved up through the ranks by taking on challenging projects and proving his worth, like many people do at their jobs, right? Well, by the 1990s, he had become one of the most influential figures in the telecommunications industry, and he was known for his aggressive tactics and relentless drive. He had this huge drive to succeed. In 1997, Nacchio was tapped to lead Qwest Communications, a company that was, at the time, just a small regional player trying to compete with the big giants like AT&T and Verizon. But Nacchio had big plans. Under his leadership, Qwest quickly became a major player in the telecom boom of the late 1990s, acquiring smaller companies and expanding its fiber optic network across the entire United States. So now here is where the influence of money and power starts to creep in. As Qwest's stock price skyrocketed, so did Nacchio's wealth. His compensation package was directly tied to the company's stock performance, as many people's are, and this guy stood to make millions if he could keep that momentum going. So, of course, the pressure, it's immense, but so was the allure of becoming one of the wealthiest and most powerful CEOs in the country. So Nacchio starts to become obsessed with maintaining Qwest's market position and his public image as a business genius. He was constantly in the media, speaking about the company's bright future and rubbing shoulders with political leaders and even celebrities. He was at the pinnacle of success, and it was intoxicating. But with all of that power came a darker side. Nacchio was under the influence of his own success. He began to make risky decisions, pushing Qwest to the brink with aggressive expansion tactics and high-stakes acquisitions. The company was growing, but it was also bleeding money, and Nacchio knew it. Behind closed doors, he was juggling financial reports, spinning stories to keep investors happy, and completely avoiding the very harsh reality that Qwest just wasn't as healthy as it appeared. Let's talk about the corporate culture at Qwest under Nacchio's leadership, because it was intense to say the least. The company was filled with young and hungry executives who were willing to do whatever it took to keep that stock price high. Risky behavior was rewarded, and there was little room for dissent. If you were not on board with Nacchio's aggressive tactics, you were just out. The environment was cutthroat, and the pressure to deliver results was relentless. This wasn't just about making money, it was about proving yourself, being the best, and then staying on top. Nacchio himself was heavily influenced by this entire environment. His every single move was scrutinized by analysts, investors, and his competitors. He became increasingly paranoid about losing his status, and he pushed his team harder and harder, demanding more results. He wanted faster growth. He wanted bigger numbers. And as the pressure mounted, so did his willingness to bend the rules. Because now he is being affected, right? Just like you have that first beer and that buzz starts to come on. Well, he's feeling the buzz of all of his success, and he doesn't want to lose it. So he's getting all aggressive, but the cracks are starting to show now. Internally, there were rumors about some financial misreporting. There was a culture of fear that was growing, and just growing unrest in general among the employees. Stock prices were beginning to fluctuate, and Nacchio was feeling the heat. To the outside world, this guy projected confidence and a whole lot of charisma. But behind the scenes, he was struggling to keep everything from completely falling apart. Investors were beginning to ask questions. Why was Qwest taking on so much debt? Why were some of its business ventures not generating the expected returns? Well, Nacchio kept spinning the story, and he was reassuring everyone that this company was on solid ground. But in all reality, that was really different. Qwest was walking a tightrope at that time, and Nacchio was desperately trying to keep his balance. As the year 2000 approached, the telecom bubble began to burst, and Nacchio found himself in a precarious position. The signs of desperation were there. Insider stock sales, increasingly erratic behavior, and a growing sense that things were starting to spiral out of control. Nacchio was still at the helm, but for how long and at what cost? And that'll do it for part one here of Joe Nacchio and the power of influence his success had on himself. So stay tuned, because in part 2, we're going to get into the moment when Joe Nacchio's world started to crumble. What do you do when the walls are closing in and you are under the influence of your own ambition? Stick around. You don't want to miss it.